Do you want to use Google Login in your NativeScript applications? In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up NativeScript and how to set up the Google app so you can log in with your Google accounts. That's coming up right now. Hey folks, this is Alex from nativescripting.com. If you're interested in social logins like Google or Facebook or Microsoft login, I'm going to show you an example how to do that with Google in this video, but also check out the Securing NativeScript Applications course that's available on nativescripting.com. There's actually a discount code in the description below. You can apply that code to any of the courses, but also the securing one. We're going to be using the NativeScript OAuth 2 plugin in this video. If you go to the GitHub repo for that plugin, which is open source, you'll be able to see the demos for Core, for NativeScript with Angular, and NativeScript with Vue. Right in that repo, it'll show you how to use it. It has examples for Facebook and Google and Microsoft included. But what's not included in that repo is how do you actually set this up with Google? Or how do you set this up with Facebook? Well, with Facebook, I've already set it up previously in an earlier video. I think that came out about a year or two ago. It's using the old NativeScript OAuth plugin. Now we're going to be using the NativeScript OAuth 2 plugin with Google. So if you want to know how to do this with Facebook, you can watch that old video. I'll post a link to it down below. The Facebook setup on the developer Facebook website is still the same. The only thing that's going to be different is using the updated plugin with your NativeScript applications. Let me know in the comments below if you use Google Login or Facebook Login or Microsoft Azure Login or whatever logins you use in your applications. All right, you ready? Let's do this. Let's start out with our usual starting point, which is the default Hello World application. Everybody's pretty familiar with this one by now, and we're going to jump right into the XML or the markup. So let's see here. I'm going to clear everything out just so that we can start fresh. We need some kind of way to log in, so I need a login button. Here I'm going to just add a stack layout, and I'm going to add a button that says login. And we need a tap handler on login tap. Great. Let's have a little bit of a style to this that's going to come from the default NativeScript styling. That's the theme that gets installed. So we'll have this button primary. Great. There's our login button. Let's head back to the code behind and implement the handler. I'm going to remove all this stuff. We don't need that. We need to export a function called onLoginTap. So here's where we're going to trigger our login. And we're going to use the NativeScript OAuth 2 plugin. So that's available on NPM, NativeScript OAuth 2. This is a plugin that I published. It's a replacement of the old NativeScript OAuth plugin. I do have a video here in the channel. It's an older video, how to use a NativeScript OAuth plugin with Facebook. So now we're doing Google this time, and this is the newer plugin. So let's go ahead and install this plugin. I'm going to terminate the running process here on the command line, and I'm going to say tns plugin add NativeScript OAuth 2. So this will essentially install the npm package, and now we're good to go. So I'm going to say tns run iOS again to kick it off. Now let's go and configure that plugin. Just to make sure, I'm going to go to package.json and make sure it's installed. And in fact, there it is. Now, the plugin needs to be configured a little bit first. In order to create all my configurations and all my settings that are related to Google, I'm going to create a new file here called authservice. So authservice.ts, this will contain all my setup. Now, if you follow the instructions of this plugin, this pretty much documents what we need to do first. We actually use tns plugin add, but you can also use npm install to add the plugin. This also provides example applications, just in case you need some code to go along with this, so you can copy and paste that as samples. So here it says when your app starts up, you have to register one or more auth providers to use with the plugin. We're going to be using Google here in this case. And this kind of shows you what kind of code we need to set up. And here's actually an example of Google right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this code right out of here. Let me copy this part right up here first. All these import statements. I'm going to copy that, and let's head over to the code and paste that in. So I will need configure tns OAuth. Now, since we're doing Google here, I don't need the options for Facebook or the Facebook provider, and I also don't need the Microsoft one. We're just going to keep the options for Google and the provider for Google right here. That's coming in from NativeScript OAuth 2/providers namespace. So the first thing we need to do is configure the providers. So I'm going to export a function called configure OAuth providers. All right. This function is going to set up our Google provider. So I'm going to create a const here, Google provider. And I'll just separate this out. Since I might have more than one provider, I'm just going to create a separate function that's going to configure OAuth provider Google. So I'm going to create that function for Google. Now, we also must call the configure TNS OAuth and pass in an array of the providers we want to configure. So I'm going to pass in Google provider once we get that set up. And this function right here is coming from NativeScript OAuth 2. Now, the reason I'm separating this out into multiple functions is because we might have Microsoft here. So const Microsoft, for example, and then we can call configure OAuth provider Microsoft like this. But today we're just going to be doing Google. So you should have this function in here, but you don't have to. So I'm going to create a separate function here called configure OAuth provider Google. And what we're going to do here is have a Google provider, and it's going to be a new instance of the TNS OA provider Google. This is what we imported right here from providers. This takes in an instance of the options. So we need to create the options here, and I'll do that in a second. And then this function will return the Google provider that we've created. So let's create the Google options. That's going to be called Google provider options. All right, and it's going to be of the type TNS OA provider options Google. I mean, this is TypeScript, so I like to explicitly type everything. If you are using just JavaScript, you don't have to provide the types, obviously, but I find it helpful if I'm using TypeScript. I can see exactly what I need to specify here. So first we need to specify OpenID support, and Google does support OpenID. So the only function here, because we've chosen the provider options Google, is OID full. Then we need to have a few more options here. Client ID, which we'll get in a minute. That's going to be a string. We need the redirect URI, which will also be a string. We'll get that set up in a minute. And the URL scheme. Now, since we're using Google here, they don't support logging in with web views. You must use the system browser to log in with Google. And that's why we need a URL scheme, and we need to register that with the application. We'll do all that later on. Finally, we need scopes. These are the permission levels that your app will ask for. We just want email in this case as a demo, but you can configure other scopes here if you want. It's just an array of strings. So there's our provider options, and I'm just going to pass that in when I create my provider. So Google provider options. There we go. All right, this configures my providers, and I need to call this configure OAuth providers function pretty early on in the application process. So I'm going to do that right in app.ts. When the app bootstraps, I'm going to go right here and call configure OAuth providers. And of course, I need to go ahead and import that from auth service. I can close out app.ts now. All right, so now that we have this service, we can use it to actually log in. So when we are here on main page and we have our login tab, we can call the auth service in order to log in. So we need to export some kind of function that allows us to log in. Export function TNS OAuth login. And then we can take in the provider type. For example, if you have multiple login options, if you have multiple buttons here in the XML, you log in with Facebook, log in with Google, you can have all of them in here. And then you would just pass in the provider type that you want as a string. We'll do that in a second. So the way the NativeScript OAuth plugin works is it creates a OAuth client. So we need to create a client here. I'm going to go up here to the top and I'm going to create a variable called client. And that's going to be of type TNS OAuth client right there. If I can just select it and it'll get auto imported from NativeScript OAuth right there. And I'll initialize that to null at first. Now, when we log in, we can create a new instance of that client. So client equals new TNS OAuth client, and it requires a provider type as a string. So I can just pass that right in there, the one that I passed into this function. Provider type can be Google or Microsoft or Facebook. You select it. Now that we have a client, we can log in. So client, and you can see what functions are available here. We can log in, log out, refresh token, and so on. I'm going to say login with completion. It's a little bit of a weird name. It comes from the way iOS names their stuff, but it kind of makes sense because what this says is we want to log in, but we also want to provide a function that we execute when the login is successful. And this function will actually is a callback. It's going to receive the token result. Let's spell that correctly. Token result. And that's of a certain type. And the type is ITNS OAuth token result. There it is. That also gets auto-imported from NativeScript OAuth 2. So that's the first parameter to the callback. The second one is just an error. Here we can check to see if there is an error. Then we can just say, I don't know, temporarily say console error. And I can say there was an error logging in. And I can print out that error message as well. There we go. Otherwise, if there is no error, that means we were successfully logged in and we have a token. So I can say console.log, logged in successfully, and I can even print out the token, or I can print out the token result, which will have a few pieces of information, including the access token, the expiration, the ID token, and so on. So let's just print out the whole result. It's going to be a JSON object. Okay, so that's set up. Now we need to call this function, which is exported from here when we're ready to log in. So that's called TNS OAuth login. I'm just going to copy it and I'm going to paste it over here in our tab handler. Let's go ahead and import that from the auth service. And this requires a string, of course, and we're going to pass in Google. Okay, I think we're pretty much set up here, except one thing. Well, a few things. Let's go back to the auth service. We need to fill out all these pieces of information: client ID, redirect URI, and URI scheme. And we need to go ahead and fill these things out in info.plist. Now, I know it's sometimes a little bit wacky working with this, especially if you're not familiar with native development. What is this info.plist? It's not JavaScript. I don't understand this. But these are unfortunately some settings that we have to set. I don't like it. You may not like it, but it's something we have to do. iOS developers will understand this, and Android developers will also understand this Android manifest. I'll give you the settings to put in here so this works. But before we do that, there's something we might want to consider doing, and that's, how is Google going to know that we want to log in? Well, that's the other part of setting this up, is we actually have to go to Google, create a developer account, and then create an app for us to be able to log in with credentials. So that's what we're going to be doing now. Let's head over to console.developers.google.com, that URL right there. If you don't have an account, you have to create one. And once you're there, you have to create a new project. So there's this drop down here for projects, for Google APIs. I'm going to create a new project here by clicking this button. Let's call this Google Login Proj, okay? And I'm going to click Create. You might already have a project, I don't know, but I'm going to create a new one. Once that's created, you have to select that project from this drop down here. So I'm going to go and select that. Now we've switched over to the project, and now I can go to credentials. So you might already have credentials, or maybe not. If you don't have credentials, this will be empty. That's how it is for me right now. And I can click Create Credentials. And what we want to do is OAuth Client ID. So this says to create an OAuth Client ID, you must first set a product name on the consent screen. Otherwise, you won't get access to any of these application types here. So let's go ahead and do that. Configure consent screen. Application type will be public. The application name will be Google Login App. You can choose a logo if you want, and you can fill out the rest of this. Now, here are the scopes that are default. Remember, we put in the email scope. You also get profile and OpenID by default here, but you can also choose other scopes if you want to. These are the permission levels. And then we can go back down here and tap Save. Okay, they don't like the fact that I used Google in the name. So I'm going to change that to my NS login app. All right, so let's go back down here and hit save, and there we go. Now I can create an OAuth client ID. I'm going to be creating an iOS one, iOS client one. That's fine. Now we need the bundle ID. This is a required field. So where do we get the bundle ID? Well, if you go back to your NativeScript application and open up the package.json file in the root, you can see in NativeScript object, there's this ID field. This is the bundle ID. So I'm going to copy this, org.nativescript.demo Google login. This is, by the way, the name I gave to my application. Yours might be different, probably will be. I'm going to copy this. Let's go back here, and I'm going to paste it right in here in the bundle ID field and click create. Once I did that, you can see that it gives you the client ID right away. This client ID is unique. You have some restrictions, of course, until your verification process is complete, and that might take several days. So you get that little warning there. I'm going to copy this and click OK. Now let's go back to the app. So in my auth service, we need to fill in that client ID. So I'm going to paste that in right here. I'm going to give myself a little more space here by closing this down. All right. Now we need the redirect URI and the URL scheme. These two are going to be very similar, and they're going to be actually the client ID in a reverse. So I'm going to say com.google user content, paste that in there, .apps. And then this long string right here. So I'm going to paste that in as the URL scheme. And the redirect URI is pretty much the same thing with the one exception. So I'm going to copy the URL scheme, paste it in the redirect URI, and then :/auth. All right, so that configures our client ID and the Google provider options. But we still have one more step to do, and that's this info plist. The reason we need to do this is because your app will actually open up a system browser in order to navigate to the Google login screen. So right after this last array and right before the ending dictionary tag, we need to add a key, which will be CF bundle URL types. I've pasted that in. And then an array. I'm going to paste that in as well. This is the CF bundle URL schemes. You can have multiple listed here. So if you're going to have Microsoft login as well, you're going to have another string here as well from Microsoft. And I already have one pre-populated here. This is not right. I need to go back to my auth service and copy this string right here for the URL scheme. I'm going to copy that. Let's go to the info plist and I'm going to paste that in here like that. This will basically register my application with the iOS operating system so that when Google authenticates me and authorizes my app, it'll redirect to my application from the system browser. And this will tell the OS, hey, this is my URL. I'm the application that registered this, so open me when Google wants to navigate to this URL. All right, I think we're done here. Let me go ahead and just restart my app to make sure everything is nice and clean. I'll restart the app and we'll give this a shot. Okay, so there's my app. I'm going to click login and look at that. We get redirected to accounts.google.com. This is not a web view. This is a system browser. And this is important because in OAuth, the user must know what the URL is that they're going to. This UI is provided by Google. So notice here it says sign in to continue to my NS login app. All right, so I'm going to sign in. By the way, this can be any Gmail account or Google Apps account. You know what? So I'm just going to use my regular Gmail account here and I'm going to hit next. And now it needs my password. I'm going to hit next. And I actually have two-factor authentication enabled here. So I need to go check my phone. All right, I went and got my phone, and on my phone, I'm going to open up the Google app, and it's asking me right away, is this you trying to sign in? And I'm going to say yes, and as soon as I do that, this will redirect me back to my login page, but I can control what page we go to after that, of course. And if you take a look at the console, you'll see that we printed out that message. There's our access token, there's the refresh token, the ID token right there, and whatever other information is that comes back with the result. So if we go back to auth service, this is where we did the print out of the token result to the console. So token result is going to have a few bits of information, and you can discover that later. Now, you might be wondering, how do we log in with Android? Because there is no info plist in Android. Well, all the JavaScript code, everything else is exactly the same. The only difference is the Android manifest file. So if we go down here, we need to register an intent filter and we need to set up the Android scheme as well. So right over here in the NativeScript activity, you can see the activity here and the NativeScript activity. We already have one set of intent filters set up. I'm going to open up another section here and this is going to be another intent filter. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in right here and I'll just explain it to you. All right, so here we have some actions defined in the categories and here is our actual path. Now this is not correct, of course. We need to go back to the auth service and copy this URL scheme right here, like we did for iOS. And in Android, I'm just going to go ahead and paste that one in as the scheme right there. And notice the Android :path is set to /auth. So once you do this, this should work in Android as well. Folks, if you like that video, let me know in the comments down below. Also, hit the subscribe button so you can get videos like this and tutorials like this one. I do a lot of animation tutorials here as well. You can check out the rest of the channel for those. So subscribe and hit the little bell so you don't miss any of those videos that are coming out. Let's check out some of the comments you've been leaving me on some of these videos. I have this video called Animate Anything, NativeScript animations of any view property, which is a really popular video because it shows you how to animate any property, not just the ones available in the API. Multishift says, this was brilliant. Why not make a plugin out of this? Hey, that's a great idea. Thanks for volunteering to do that, Shiva. Just kidding. No, but it really should probably be a plugin so that we can just pull it in and use it. Fahmi Shar says, very cool tutorial. Any GitHub link for animation helpers? Yeah, I have a link in that video. It's in the comments. It'll show you the GitHub repo and how to do everything. Mohammed Maher says, you know what? Your explanation is very simple and clear. Makes me to understand very well the promise, even that video was not for it. Again, I love it. Thank you very much. Thanks for the very kind words, Mohammed. I appreciate that. Coding Kang says, thanks, Alex. I so love this tutorial. It really helped me out a lot. I hope next you can give more animation tutorials for us. Thanks. Guess what, Coding Kang? I've got a lot of animation tutorials coming out, and it's based on this JavaScript animation tutorial that you commented on. We're going to do a lot of crazy stuff here. IFS Amp1 says, hi, Alex. This is a very nice video. I just add that feature on my project. Thanks so much. That's really awesome. Somebody using the code that I provided in the video in their project. That's really, really nice to hear. Rakesh Girasi says, thank you for the great content. I would like to see more on user interface testing on NativeScript. Yeah, the testing side of NativeScript, especially the UI testing, is not an easy solution. I think I'm going to include a new chapter in one of my NativeScript Pro courses on user interface testing. I already have the chapters on unit testing in those courses, but the user interface testing is a story that needs to be covered as well. Thanks for that comment, Rakesh. Michael Kimenitz says, cool, thanks. What about animating SVG? For example, stroke dash array preloader. Do you have some solutions? Unfortunately, Michael, SVG is not yet supported in NativeScript. I've played around with different shapes. I've actually created the shapes video in this channel. Check that out if you haven't already seen that. But that's as close as I've gotten to being able to use shapes. The other thing you can do to create different shapes is using the clip path in CSS. I know that's really far away from being able to actually use SVGs in NativeScript. There are a couple of plugins out there. I haven't been able to get them working, unfortunately, but hopefully that's coming at some point in the future. Thanks for that, Michael. And Corsaro Nero says, that's awesome. Alex, may I ask for your opinion about PWA app? Are they going to replace Framework to build up mobile? Thanks. Corsaro, PWAs look pretty good. I personally don't think they're quite there yet. You need a lot more support for them to be able to do all the things that native apps can do. So I'm still in the camp of native app people. And by native app, I mean also NativeScript apps, because NativeScript apps convert to native apps. So I'll give it some time. Maybe in 5 years, PWAs will be able to do all the things that native apps can do, or maybe not. Maybe native apps will go away and PWAs will be left. Maybe there'll be a new technology. Who knows? We'll see. I'll keep my eye open. All right, folks. Till next time. Bye.